speaking, somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The net zero consensus has been smashed today. The Prime Minister announced his intention to delay the penal deadlines of the net zero regime. New petrol diesel ban delayed, oil boiler ban delayed, gas boiler ban delayed, energy performance fine stopped. And perhaps best of all, read his lips, no new taxes. Is this how Rishi wins the next election? Why aren't Britons as keen to work hard as they used to be? Whilst we've historically always been one of the hardest working nations in the world, earlier this month, a King's College report revealed Britons are increasingly seeing their work as unimportant. I'll be hearing from one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the UK, Sir Rocco Forte. Inflation, good news, may be coming under control. In spite of a steep rise in oil prices, inflation continues to decline. As the latest figures reveal, we are well on our way to halving inflation by the end of the year. Just goes to show, as ever, forecasts are almost always wrong. Plus, as Sir Keir Starmer visit French President Emmanuel Macron, new plans have been unveiled for a UK associate membership of the EU drawn up by Germany and France, which would bring this nation back under the tyrannical jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And guess who was behind it all? Sir Tony Blair. Who else? We'll be playing a game of Know Your Night. State of the Nation starts now. Joined by an incisive panel this evening, Assistant Editor of the London Financial Journal, Andy MacDonald, and the writer and broadcaster, Benedict Spence. As always, you know this, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Well, good evening. And the top story today is, as you've been hearing, the Prime Minister has set out today revised plans to his net zero plans in a controversial overhaul of the government's green policies. Among the measures was a weakening of the phasing out of residential gas boilers, as well as easing the transition to electric vehicles by pushing back a ban on new petrol and diesel cars until 2035. Rishi Sunak says he wants a more realistic approach to net zero, which eases the burden on the British people.
Our destiny can be our own choosing, but only if we change the way our politics works. Can we be brave in the decisions we make, even if there is a political cost? Can we be honest when the facts change, even if it's awkward? And can we put the long-term interests of our country before the short-term political needs of the moment, even if it means being controversial?
Well, the move has ignited a significant backlash. More than 250 charities and businesses are urging the government not to weaken green targets. Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth says the Prime Minister's decision puts pressure now on households.
It reveals Rishi Sunak is very weak. He's being pushed around by Liz Truss and he's causing chaos. This is a set of announcements which is undermining business investment in this country. He's undermining the stability of our economy, and it's actually going to cost consumers more.
Now, the government's plan to deal with inflation is working, according to the Chancellor. The rate of inflation fell today to 6.7% in August. That's down from 6.8% in July. The Bank of England had predicted the figure to increase to more than 7%. It comes ahead of another expected interest rate rise tomorrow. Consultants and junior doctors took unprecedented industrial action today, holding their first ever joint strike, manning picket lines during a walkout over pay. Thousands of BMA medics have stopped work at NHS hospitals across England, delaying operations and placing more pressure on the NHS. And lastly, the King and Queen are attending a banquet at the Palace of Versailles in France tonight as their 3-day state visit to the country continues. King Charles and Queen Camilla are guests of honour at the black tie event in the fabulous Hall of Mirrors. Both the King and the French President will toast shared culture and history with the 160 guests there, including Mick Jagger, Arsene Wenger and Hugh Grant. Earlier, the monarch was greeted by Emmanuel Macron at a ceremony of remembrance at the Arc de Triomphe before visiting the Élysée Palace for talks later in the afternoon. With GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
The Prime Minister has announced a number of fundamental changes to our net zero deadlines. He has delayed the ban on all new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035. He's also delayed the ban on new boilers to 2035 too. He has scrapped the enforcement of all rental properties to have an energy performance rating of C by 2028. Some of these policies would have cost consumers as much as £20,000, depending on the type of home they live in. And I think these changes could win the Conservatives the next election. When I was, albeit briefly, Business and Energy Secretary, I said environmentalism must never be allowed to make people poor. It's important that we not outpace public support. All government has to be by consent, and people don't consent to be made cold and poor. And net zero will be achieved by innovation, not by government fiat. And until this afternoon, we were going to ban new oil boilers in 2026, which would hit people in my constituency, a rural constituency in Somerset, particularly hard, because heat pumps cost over £15,000, much more than a new oil boiler. In other words, the green consensus was going to make us, the nation, cold and poor. It's also true for the ban on new petrol and diesel cars in 2030. We talked about this before. The cheapest new electric car on the market is about £20,000. But because of the battery life, there's not much of a second-hand market in electric cars. So the cheap cars that people would buy for a few £100s when they first learned to drive were never realistically going to be available. Not surprisingly, a number of electric car company bosses have admitted that there are no plans for mass market products because production costs are simply too high. Additionally, we were set to destroy the private rental market with punitive measures for landlords. It was going to make it more costly for landlords, but landlords pass these costs on to tenants, or they simply leave the market, removing choice. That's why the Prime Minister's announcements are so encouraging. He's putting the interests of consumers, of the British people first. Because if green energy were so cheap, as its proponents maintain, it would already be taking over from fossil fuels by market forces. Instead, its high cost was impoverishing our society. The same is true in other places too. Look at Germany, which spent more on green energy than anyone else, and yet they pay more per kilowatt hour than any other country in the world. Similarly in Denmark, and it's what we were doing here. It may be, with new technology, green energy will become cheap, but it won't become cheap just because the government says so. The whole point of government, the whole point of politics, of public service, is to make people's lives easier and help them to become more prosperous. The rush to net zero was making people poor. Rishi Sunak's also got rid of the fanaticism on recycling, where people were going to have 7 bins. Again, politics is about making people's lives easier to lead, not more bureaucratic and complex. And to achieve net zero, there must be popular support. This will not be maintained if people are penalised, so a measured introduction is essential. Rishi Sunak has sent the hair shirt to the incinerator. He's lifted the burden off society, and actually he will make net zero by 2050 more rather than less likely. Of course, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts. You know the email bar now, mailmog@gbnews.com. And I'm delighted to be joined by Bob Ward, the Director of Policy and Communications at the LSE Grantham Institute, along with my panel, Assistant Editor of London Financial Journal, Andy MacDonald, and the writer and broadcaster, Benedict Spence. Well, thank you, first of all, for coming in. This is a really important announcement, isn't it? It has changed the consensus, and the opposition doesn't know what to say. They don't agree with it, but they're not saying they're going to bring all these deadlines back.
Well, he hasn't changed the consensus on the need to get to net zero emissions by 2050, so that's an important point. And he did make some positive announcements. The increase in the size of the grant to help with the boiler upgrade scheme, to help you transfer to heat pumps. His announcement that he'll go to COP28 is important, and his recognition that we need to overhaul the power grid. However, his announcements about delaying the phase-out date for petrol and diesel cars and for gas boilers is actually going to hit us all much harder. And the reason is this. At the moment, the thing that's making us poorer and colder is our dependence on fossil fuels. The cost of living crisis was caused by and triggered by the massive rise in natural gas prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. If we had moved faster to embrace clean domestic energy and move to things like electric vehicles and to heat pumps earlier, we would not have been suffering as much now. Inflation today didn't drop as much as we expected because petrol prices are going up because Russia and Saudi Arabia are cutting supplies. It's making us poor and cold.
America has had much lower inflation because it's used its own resources, it's got shale gas out of the ground, it's kept the gas price down. It's our failure to do the same, and it's green policies that stopped it, things like the Bank of England telling banks not to lend to oil and gas companies, not to lend to fossil fuel companies. This has restricted our access to cheap energy. And then we say gas is expensive, only because we've made it so, only because we've restricted exploration.
Well, you can try and make the case that we should be fracking around the country. I'm sure if we were talking about fracking in your constituency and not in say, Blackpool, your constituents may have a different view.
I've said before, I'm all in favour of fracking in Somerset.
Yes. So we'll see how many of your constituents share that
Well,
view.
we used to have coalfields in Somerset.
Indeed, but having fracking is a different question. So if you want to make that argument, but we don't know that we have anywhere near enough shale gas that would make any difference to international markets of gas. So selling, at the moment, if you were producing fracked shale gas in the UK, you'd be selling it at the market price, which is higher. But remember that the inflation rate in the United States has unexpectedly just gone up, and the reason it's gone up is because of the increase in the oil price, because they are not insulated from the effect of Saudi Arabia and Russia. And why is it? It's not taking back control to leave us more dependent on the actions of Russia and Saudi Arabia, rather than having great British clean energy driving electric vehicles.
Benedict, actually, it's not Great British Clean Energy driving vehicles, is it? It's heavy, dirty batteries with child labour in the Congo dependent on the Chinese.
The line that I always enjoy about renewable energies is that we're going to turn Great Britain into the Saudi Arabia of wind, and I don't think they've ever turned on an oil tap in Saudi Arabia and just one day the oil's decided it's not going to come out. You know, that's not really how it works. But that is how it works with wind. It's not really the same at all. I mean, just on the subject of being sort of beholden to countries like OPEC and Russia. At the start of the Ukraine war, when we saw this sort of the spike in inflation, the only part of Europe that didn't experience a massive uptick in energy cost was the Italian region of Basilicata. Why? Because they ignored the central government proclamations about not drilling for oil and gas, and they drilled for oil and gas. And so actually they didn't have that. And this is the thing. Britain is actually incredibly wealthy in terms of the natural resources we have under our feet. We simply choose not to use them. Yeah, once you've got these things out of the ground, whether you not decide whether you're going to sort of sell them on the open market or whether you're going to be quite radical and be quite, you know, sort of nationalistic about these things, you can do anything you want. We would probably choose to do the former. We would choose to be at the behest of global headwinds. That's fine. But you have to give yourself the opportunity. Now, what we're sort of talking about here is it going to be green energy, wind, or is it going to be fossil fuels? There is, of course, the other way, which is nuclear. But, of course, people in local constituencies vote against nuclear. So what are you to do in that situation?
Andy, isn't the key of what's happened today is recognising that the targets were frankly unrealistic, and that promising to do things in a few years' time and you can't afford to do them just makes government look foolish.
Well, absolutely. I think when the 2030 target was set, we imagined that the market would be going a lot quicker than it was. We hadn't anticipated COVID at that time. That has slowed, objectively, no matter which side of the argument you sit on, COVID has objectively slowed down innovation in the kind of green industries. But I think that what is important now, that we maintain one single goal, so then the market stability is there. Because if we keep changing the goalpost maybe from 2030 to 35 and then to 2050, that'll create much greater market instability, and that will cost, that normal kind of working to middle class homebody much, much more than it would if we just kept to 2035 and then maybe missed it. I think the government needs to maintain a clear industrial strategy in both green energy and digital innovation, because those are two topics that they keep changing on, so then that the markets remain stable, so then the everyday individual isn't as detrimentally affected as they have been.
But Bob, won't the market provide for innovation anyway, because that's what markets do, if it's genuinely cheaper? And that the fallacy within the whole green drive has been thinking it should be done on subsidies and regulation.
Well, subsidies are necessary when you have early stage technologies where the prices are high, but you help with the costs, and through greater production, manufacturers learn by doing, the unit price comes down. We see that with almost any technology. It's not just about green technology. But let's take an example of insulation. What the Prime Minister could have chosen to do today was announce increased investment and support for homeowners to get insulation. You mentioned letting landlords off the hook and allowing themselves to rent out badly insulated homes to tenants who will therefore pay greater prices for fuel because they're wasting a lot of energy. It is not smart to be weak
but these landlords would simply leave the market.
Dumb.
So there wouldn't be any property to rent because people would not let these properties out. They'd sell them.
The only reason we are stuck where we are is because we're not investing in these things. The government has decided...
Taxpayers' money being spent.
Well, that's right. But remember...
It always falls on the backs of taxpayers.
Taxpayers also pay bills for fuel. We are not going to be better off by being more dependent on fossil fuels, which we waste because we have poorly insulated
You have
buildings.
beautifully encapsulated the difference between the left and the right, that I want individuals to do it for themselves, free market, free competition, and you think, and it's a perfectly rational argument,
so you won't
it should be done by the taxpayer.
Why don't you help
Because I don't want any further burdens on taxpayer. Taxes are high enough. But thank you to Bob and to my panel. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, how do we get the quiet quitters back to work? So Rocco 40 may have the answer. Plus, could a Labour government mean a Tony Blair Mark II?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programmes sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Peter, really important point. As a result of today's announcement, is the Conservative Party in danger of becoming a Conservative Party once again and no longer a Lib Dem lookalike? Well, I think you may well be right. And Carol, phew, that's a relief. The anxiety we were facing up and down the country was just unbearable. But now Sunak's done the right thing and put the country first. He's getting my vote at the next election for sure. We can't run before we learn to walk. And this response is why I think what Sunak's announced today is so important. But the UK economy needs economic growth. It is currently a high-tax, low-productivity economy with liabilities increasing faster than income. So what is wrong with Britain's productivity? Although the economy may be doing well compared to sluggish European counterparts, it's falling behind the rest of the world. Since the time of the financial crisis in 2008, our productivity has stagnated and it still hasn't reverted to trend. A worrying recent report revealed that UK workers place a low importance on their work, which may be part of the problem. How do we return to the high growth which we need to pay our way? Well, one man who may have some answers is the hotelier and entrepreneur, Sir Rocco Forte. Rocco, thank you so much for coming in. You employ many people. Why aren't you getting the productivity that you think you should be able to get? What is deterring people from working?
Well, there are a number of things, but basically the incentives aren't there. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily true of every business. In my business, people are committed and work hard. But there's a sole syndrome now, post-COVID syndrome, where people don't want to come in to work. They won't want to go to the office. One of the major banks had created huge consternation when they announced that people had to come to the office 2 days a week. HSBC had problems just now announced people had to come back for 3 days a week, not 5 days. And so people want to sort of work half the time and think that this is fine. The reality in most businesses, there are cases where people can work from home and there are jobs that you can do working from home. But in most cases, you have to have interaction in an office. And particularly for young people who are learning and want to develop and be successful, working with people more senior than them who've had more experience and learning from them. They're never going to do that from home.
And how do you get people to go to work in the first place, get them off benefits and into work? Because we've got, 5 million people on out-of-work benefits of one kind or another?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Of course, the people on disability benefits have grown by, I think, 1 million since before COVID. Can people be that much iller now than they were before? The marginal rates of taxation, if you're on benefits, if you want to work, are so high that it's a complete disincentive. And of course, people who are at work are having their taxes increased. with this, thresholds being frozen, is creating a big burden of tax on a lot of people who shouldn't be paying those a higher rate of tax when they reach certain salaries.
So high tax, high withdrawal rate of benefits make for a sluggish economy, a sluggish labour market. What would you encourage the government to do to make it more pro-business? What steps, particularly could a Conservative government take?
Well, I mean, they've done everything other than that. The raising corporation tax 25%, the windfall tax on energy companies who stopped all investment in the North Sea. They destroyed the rental market at a time when we need more housing. Rishi, when he was Chancellor, raised national insurance, although that was taken away by Liz Truss. There's no sort of vision of growing the economy, how it can grow. It's like the Treasury, a bunch of accountants adding the sums up and not making them square up. Not looking forward and saying, how do we get the economy moving? The enterprise zones that Liz Truss suggested have been emasculated completely. They're nothing like the zones that Thatcher set up. And again, the Treasury says, oh, we lose income in the short term. But the reality is they create jobs in the longer term and create thriving economies where there isn't one at the moment. I got a £40 million grant to build a resort in Sicily, which was 25% of the total investment. If I hadn't got that grant, I wouldn't have got there. I employed 500,000 people directly. They made me honorary citizen of Shaka, the nearby town, and the mayor, when he announced this, says 1,000 small businesses have been created on the back of Verdura, this resort. And this is, you need a bit of pump priming is needed, and you've got to make investment if you want a return. This government is blind to that.
So it's Treasury bean counting that means we're falling behind other countries in attracting investment, and then if you get investment, you may get more productivity because you're getting people into work, and people actually enjoy being in work, don't they?
Well, of course. I mean, and work isn't. I mean, it's very unfortunate if you have to do a job you don't enjoy. But I mean, there's a camaraderie of coming into the office. There's a sort of social life around the office, which is very important, and it fills a very important void in many people's lives. And it gives you. I mean, I'm 78 now, still working a full day because I'm enjoyed. I'm motivated by it, and it drives me forward. If I sat at home playing golf every day, I'd be bored stiff.
And so the government needs to get a grip so that it makes it a more business-friendly environment. One of the things I know you've campaigned for is the removal of the tourism tax, of the VAT on tourists who can choose to buy their goods wherever they feel like.
Yeah, we've been running this campaign with the Daily Mail. 350 major businesses all signed the letter to the Chancellor. The editor of the Daily Mail went to the Chancellor and the Chancellor said, well, I need some proof. You'd think the Treasury, with all its resources, could find proof. So we had to go out and get the proof, which shows that the economy is losing 10.7 billion a year in GDP. It's costing the Treasury about 2 million in taxes. There's 1 million that they would lose from the VAT rebate. But there's 3 million that would come in from other taxes, also creating more jobs and so on, and creating a vibrant economy. But the civil service isn't. It should be setting an example. Most of the civil service is at home still. You were going around.
I tried, yes.
A lot of offices have only 40% of the staff back or less.
Oh, less than that. I mean, you still see acres of empty space in Whitehall.
And they're the ones who should be setting example. Tom Scholar was running the Treasury, the most important department of government, from Argentina.
Was he really? He was in Argentina?
Time, yes.
My goodness, yes.
His wife had a house there or something, and so he was allowed to run it from Argentina at a critical time for the country.
When the Treasury was making some of the most important decisions it ever had to make and spend £400 billion of taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a revelation. Sir Rocco, thank you very much for coming on. Coming up, the inflation figures are in and the forecasters are wrong. What a surprise. Could the Prime Minister meet his promise to halve inflation by the end of the year? And don't forget, we'll be playing a game of Spot the Difference between Tony Blair and Keir Starmer.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkle and here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Some heavy rain across parts of the southeast clearing away overnight, but blustery showers in the northwest and some sunny skies on Thursday. Meanwhile, at the moment we are under the influence of low pressure just to the north of the UK, and we have a cold front lying across southeastern parts, and it's this front that is bringing some intense heavy downpours as we go through the rest of today, gradually clearing away towards the east overnight. Behind it, some clear skies developing though. Notice some showers towards western parts of Wales and England and some hefty rain across the far northwest of the UK. With the clear skies, temperatures are going to dip a little bit lower than some recent nights. Most towns and cities, though, holding up in double figures. Thursday is going to be a brighter, sunnier day than it has been recently, for most of us at least. Some showers already across western and perhaps far southern coastal areas of England and Wales. These becoming more widespread as we go through into the afternoon. Across Scotland and Northern Ireland, a bit more cloud here and some heavy showery rain feeding in, and this could turn thundery at times. Temperatures likely to be a touch down compared to today, but still getting to highs of around 19, possibly 20 Celsius. Through Friday then, it again is going to get off to a largely bright start, but we will see showers becoming widespread as we head into the afternoon. Some of them could still be heavy, perhaps even thundery, and notably still windy across the far northwest. But things are going to ease down as we go through later Friday, so Saturday should get off to a chilly start before the rain returns on Sunday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, as you probably guessed, and this is State of the Nation, and you've been getting in touch with your views. Fran says, I don't think Britain is work shy. Working from home is now the new normal. It saves people money on commutes, and we are able to have a good work-life balance. Up to a point, Lord Copper. Peter, another Peter. Everyone seems to be called Peter, really. I just wonder whether it's my son sending in lots of messages. Anyway, if it is you, Peter, keep up the good work. The answer for the lack of productivity is simple. The gig economy and zero-hour contract. Actually, I don't think that would be Peter's view. In an extremely unexpected turn of events, the rate of UK inflation fell in August, despite economists' fears that it would rise to well over 7%. The Office for National Statistics reported that inflation dropped to 6.7% last month, compared to 6.8% in July. The outcome has been attributed to slower increases in the cost of food. 6.7% inflation is now remarkably at its lowest rate since February 2022. As the Bank of England was beginning to face pressure to increase interest rates further, the surprise fall in inflation now throws its next move into question. All of this comes as a new study by the Children's Society has revealed that young people have become more concerned about the cost of living than the state of the environment or even crime statistics. More than 2 million children in the UK admitted that they were more worried about not having enough money than what the future of the environment looked like. Many young people were particularly nervous about what's on the horizon for the next 12 months, as more than 80% of those involved in the study said they were anxious about how the cost of living crisis would impact their family in the next year. What with these disturbing revelations, how can we make sense of the current state of our economy? Well, I'm now joined by David Payton, Professor of Industrial Economics at Nottingham University. David, thank you for joining me. First of all, do you think the worst is behind us on the inflation figures, or the increase in the oil price may feed through in a month or two?
Well, that is putting a bit of a blip in proceedings, but the long-term trend is for inflation to go down. It looks likely that Rishi Sunak will meet his target of halving inflation probably by the start or the early part of next year. It's not just the sort of headline inflation rate, the core inflation rate, which the ONS presents, which sort of strips out some of the more volatile aspects like energy and food, that went down quite significantly this month. So that's probably the figure that the Bank of England will pay more attention to than the headline figure. Although, as you say, that was surprisingly good news. Analysts were expecting a figure of about 7.2 perhaps, and it came in as a small reduction from last month, but down to 6.7, much lower than was predicted. So that is generally, I think, good news for the economy.
And that makes the Bank of England's decision on interest rates even more difficult, doesn't it? Because with figures moving in the right direction, should they keep the pressure up, or should they slightly take their foot off the brake?
Yeah, I think the Bank of England's got to be very careful, because interest rate increases take some time to feed through into the economy. So we've probably not seen the full hit from interest rate increases from the past few months yet on the economy. And the real danger for the economy is that further increases push us into recession. So I think there's now quite a strong case for the Bank of England at least to hold fire for a month or two. And the signs do look like inflation in the long term will continue to go down. So probably, I think the expectation is there'll be one more rise to go this week. I think the Bank of England might be better off just being a bit cautious, doing nothing this month, and then seeing how, if the good news continues on inflation, because the risk, as I said, really is about the impact on the economy now of recession. And we know we're at very low growth rates.
And do you think that's priced into sterling at the moment? Because obviously if sterling weakens too much, that becomes inflationary in itself. So if there were a delay in the interest rate increase that was expected until quite recently, can sterling take the pressure?
Yeah, it would probably hit sterling a little bit, which might, again, put pressure on import prices. I think the markets are pricing in probably one more rise, so they're expecting still a small rise tomorrow. Perhaps with the better than expected inflation figures today, the markets have probably factored in the chance now that the Bank of England will hold fire. I think the interest rate rises have different impacts on inflation though, because one of their consequences is it raises the cost of housing, it potentially increases mortgage prices, so that although the Bank of England hopes that higher interest rates sort of dampens down the economy, reduces activity, and therefore reduces pressure on prices. It's not all in that direction. So they have got to be very careful, I think. Interest rates have gone up a lot in a short period of time, and now's probably time to take stock and see at least for another month.
Well, thank you very much, David. With me now is my panel, Assistant Editor of the London Financial Journal, Andy MacDonald, and the writer and broadcaster, Benedict Spence. Andy, Rishi Sunak's going to meet his target. Great man.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, whilst he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he consistently missed it. You know, I think he sent 6 or 7 letters to the Governor of the Bank of England whilst he was Chancellor, as inflation was slowly rising and then dramatically rising, saying, yeah, it's fine, it's all going to plan. There was a great article out, I think a couple of months ago, about how he kept reassuring the Bank of England that, yeah, it's fine, chill out, as they were raising it. So, yes and no, but I think it's gone marginally down. But realistically, you know, the everyday person won't see that change. You know, Tesco meal deals, for example, they raised those during the inflation hike. They're not going to go back down. You know, a pint of milk, that's not going to go back down. And if we actually look at the everyday impact of the inflation hike, it's not going to be reduced.
And this very interesting survey that children, young people are very worried about the cost of living and more worried about it than green issues. That's quite a change, isn't it, in public perceptions?
Yeah, I guess so. I think the survey was done children aged 10 to 17. So obviously the impact of the cost of living crisis, the inflation hike, will be directly applicable to them. But I reckon if you looked at the 18 to 21, maybe that university student, the environment might be slightly higher up, I think that's been demonstrated previously. But I think, 100% the recent inflation hike, it's gone down marginally, but it's not going to have a massive effect on the everyday working person. Maybe it'll have an effect to the bottom line of some Wall Street brokers, but unfortunately, you know, your people in like your constituency, for example, and other more urban constituencies, it's not going to help much.
But Andy's basically right, isn't he? That once prices have gone up, that increase is there, and you've got to earn more to be able to stand still.
Yes.
And therefore, even if inflation is coming down at 6.7%, you've still got to get quite a big pay rise to keep level.
It's still actually significantly higher than anybody would wish it to be. And you know, just to go back to the topic of the survey about younger people being more concerned about this than things like the environment, I think that that's very telling, because not to sort of go two-footed on net zero again, our attitude to net zero until today has been the attitude of a far wealthier country than we actually are. And you need to look back, and we do need to look before COVID at growth in this country. It has been stagnant. It's been stagnant across Europe, but that's beside the point. It has been stagnant here. And that is why I think people are really beginning to feel it, because there is still no real prospect of their wages catching up. And I think we also need to recognise that a lot of this is out of the Prime Minister's hands. I have a lot of sympathy for him on this, because everything is globalised now, and you are affected by price hikes and things like energy. We've had a very mild summer, relatively. I know everybody's saying that Europe's been on fire, but actually, you know, crops have not been destroyed en masse as they were in previous years. So that will have affected the price of food. But during this period, of course, there has been the Black Sea grain deal, which has shipped 33 million tonnes of grain from Ukraine and Russia to the rest of the world. That has now come to an end. You are therefore likely, as is always the case in food production, a year later to feel the hit of that.
The children's survey is really interesting because children have been pretty much brainwashed to believe that greenery is everything. And it's fascinating that a poll has then come out that says, hold on a minute, we may have been told this stuff in school, but actually we see our parents struggling to pay their bills. We're much more concerned about the cost of living.
It always comes down to the pound in your pocket. And ultimately, where people will vote in the next general election based on whether or not they feel significantly poorer, or whether or not they notice that they got poorer and then it's got slightly better. That is what they will judge Rishi Sunak on, and he can have all these other pledges. Most of them, even though they are important, are fundamentally secondary to that. But, you know, you pointed out that if you were to sort of go... sorry, it was you, actually, that pointed out if you were to sort of look at university students, they might be slightly different. Well, we're talking here about children who are living at home with mum and dad, who can see the effects of working families, not people who are living on a loan or a grant, and therefore are slightly isolated from that.
But these two stories come together as a very positive story for the Prime Minister, don't they? That people are worried about the cost of living. He's reacted to that. He's cutting back on green ambition in the short term. Young people accept this as an argument. He's really got his finger on the pulse of the nation's view.
Well, I'd say yes on some things, perhaps on others no. I wouldn't say it's particularly positive, because whilst he was Chancellor, the situation became what it is today. So, yes, no, but I think it is... you know, I'm not a supporter of Rishi Sunak, but if I was in his office and I saw this survey, I would feel slightly reassured that almost the next generation of voters had similar priorities to what the current Conservative Party seems to have.
I think the polling, because it's not been shifting, has finally sort of prompted him to be bold and say, look, trying to sort of steer the middle path and be everybody's best friend isn't going to work. You need to be bold. You need to appeal to what your voters want and what the ordinary members of the public want. And, yeah, that is what I think it boils down to. Now, is it a good day? We wait and see. I mean, you used the word brainwashed. I happen to think that a lot more people in this country would consider themselves environmentalists and are not entirely aware of what net zero necessarily involves yet. I don't think the full force of that has hit everybody. I think it's hitting some people, especially the poorest, but the middle classes, I don't think it's quite hit home yet so far. So we will have to wait and see actually what the impact of this will be. I think it's a gamble, but I'm glad he's made a gamble.
Well, I think actually if you look wider than net zero, you know, in the wider kind of eco-environmentalism agenda, I think if you look at that, a lot of people in the Midlands and the North felt that in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, if you go all the way back to Thatcher, Major and Blair, when their industries were being shut down because it was cheaper and more efficient to do it to Europe. So I think actually this, almost like Brexit, this issue has been bubbling for a long, long time. A lot of people feel incredibly passionate about it because their industry were, you know, it was stripped away in the name of this agenda.
Well, we saw this with Port Talbot the other day. Actually, there's visceral anger against net zero policies.
We were talking about this yesterday, and I'd happily go back to steel, but we're going to have to keep that for another night. But thank you to my excellent panel. Coming up are the moment you've all been waiting for, the game of Know Your Night Tonight.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail Moggs. George, it's great to see the economy improving slightly. After such a worrying time, this is exactly the kind of news we need to hear more of. And Linda, the children's survey certainly surprised me. It's nice to see that the young do know how important money is instead of bleating on about climate change all of the time. Well, I would say, having 6 children of my own, it is not easy to brainwash your children. They are so independent-minded and question what you say, and I've always thought that ultimately the greenwashing of children would be unsuccessful. The leader of His Majesty's opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, has had quite a busy week. First, it was The Hague, in which he revealed some puzzling plans to solve the migrant crisis by letting in more migrants. Then he was busy on a romantic visit to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and yesterday he was with Citizen Macron in the former British territory, now known as France. We lost it in the 100 Years' War. We'll discuss that on another occasion. But it turned out that Sir Tony Blair brokered the meeting that coincided with the revelation of plans drafted by the French and the Germans that would see the United Kingdom become an associate member of the European Union. The European Court of Justice would then come in and tell us what to do. I hate to tell you, I told you so, but it was only on Monday when I suggested Sir Keir could take Britain into a Norway-style position in the EU. So now it's time for a game of Spot the Sir or Know Your Knights. One wants to take us back into the European Union. The other wants to take us back into the European Union. One wants open borders. The other wants open borders. One wants to destroy our constitution beyond recognition. In fact, he did destroy our constitution beyond recognition. But the other wants to destroy our constitution even more. So who is whom? Well, perhaps the Transcaucasia expert, who happens to be a former Labour MP, but isn't sadly a knight, Sir Stephen Pound, as he ought to be, may have some answers. Stephen, so has Keir Starmer morphed in to Tony Blair?
No. Look, let's get a thing absolutely straight. You know, I don't want to shoot your fox, to use a Somerset expression, but the reality is that this is two the foreign ministers of Germany and France, it's Lawrence Boone and Anna Lerman, came up with this rather bizarre idea of a 4-tier Europe. Now, what they're saying, the one sensible thing amongst this is that we're talking about European expansion quite clearly, obviously Ukraine possibly coming in, Kosovo, you know, maybe some of the Balkan countries. And they said European expansion has to equal European reform. Now, one of the things they've got in this is a thing called associate membership, which is, you know, you may, in fact, you wouldn't be an associate member of many clubs, you would be a founder member of many clubs, I have no doubt. But, you know, associate membership is a rather stupid idea. But on the other hand, what they're proposing, and this has been completely poo-pooed by the Labour Party, by the way, so we're not remotely interested, but it would give us frictionless access to a market of 500 million people. And I think a lot of people in this country would rather like that.
So the Labour Party is not in the least bit interested in something that you think is absolutely wonderful.
No, that's
quite an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're making my case for me.
I'm not bound by the whip anymore.
but
no. Look, as far as I'm concerned, I think the original. I mean, I was around at the time when I was, in fact, with the original vote on the European Union. I was seduced by Margaret Thatcher, you know, who was absolutely convinced that we should go into Europe for economic grounds, the old European, the EEA, European Economic Area, and I still think an economic union is a marvellously sensible thing. But it's the rest that worries me.
Isn't the history of our membership of the European Union and our involvement with
Mission Creep
that people say this will never happen, this will never happen, and then it does.
Yeah.
And so you get a paper that's deniable. It's by a couple of foreign ministers, only of the most important member states of the European Union. We can deny it safely. But nonetheless, it's exactly what Starmer was talking about a renegotiation, about taking some refugees from Europe, a closer association. Oh, then lo and behold, there's a paper that offers a route that may suit exactly what he wants.
I think even the most fevered conspiracy theorists couldn't actually think that there was a read across from there. There's no causal linkage between those statements. And I think a closer relationship with the rest of the European continent, it makes good sense. But let's get one thing absolutely clear. We in this country, the Labour Party, I think the nation, all of us, are not remotely interested in a 3rd or 4th tier membership of any European Union. End of.
You're sure about that?
100%. Would you be in favour?
Well, of course I'd be opposed to it. I'm quite happy with us being outside the European Union.
Don't you think the grain of the nation would be against that?
I think it would be very difficult to get through, but there are a lot of people in powerful positions who deeply resent the fact that we left the European Union, would like to copy the European Union in certain ways, have closer alignment with the European Union. It's part of Labour Party's policy on food exports.
Well, food standards, food safety standards, please.
Well, but then you get to alignment. Once you get to alignment, you get to dynamic alignment. Once you've got dynamic alignment, you've got the European Court. There's quite a senior elite political level to make us closer to Europe?
So, Jake, I think, not for the first time, you do actually make a very important point in amongst it. The original iron and steel, do you remember the original Jean Monnet European Union, was purely an economic linkage idea, and it made sense. Post-war reconstruction, it made a lot of sense. And there has been this sort of mission creep since then. But I think, in June 2016, we voted to leave the European Union. I was a Remainer, but I'm a Democrat. And I think most people in this country would not be remotely interested in having another vote on the European Union.
I mean, I'm finding myself in dangerous agreement with you, because had the European Union remained strictly an economic activity,
ideal,
there would have been very little harm to it. Yeah. But I certainly wouldn't want to join an economic activity with Europe again, because we saw what happened last time, and it would be the door into a closer Europe.
Which is what Churchill wanted, after all.
Well, Churchill at one point threatened to unite the
United States,
the UK and France.
Yeah.
Without mentioning it to Australia.
So did the Black Prince, I believe.
Well, he got quite close to it, actually.
We're talking about Agincourt.
well, that's Cressy. 1346. 1415 is Agincourt.
Yeah.
And indeed, Henry VI was crowned in Paris as King of France, but they invented the Salic law to say that we couldn't have the King of France. And the very last...
I hope you're all listening, by the way.
They are. The very last battle...
When was Poitiers?
Poitiers just after Cressy, isn't it? It's a couple of years after Cressy?
I should have known better.
Something like that. Anyway...
let's agree on one thing. We oppose mission creep. We oppose the idea of a constant extension of European rights, particularly into the field of jurisprudence, but we support the idea of an economic linkage.
We like being friendly with our neighbours, but we don't want to put the fleur-de-lis back on the royal standard.
It's on it already, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it went off with George III when he disclaimed the right to the Kingdom of France. Anyway, I'm going to be cut off if I don't go over. So thank you, Stephen. That's all from me. Next up is the great Professor. Daniel, what's on the menu this evening?
Seriously, I'm taking notes, guys. You two are so smart. You are so smart. That was absolutely fascinating. We're continuing the EU debate, obviously the Nut Zero debate too, plus the Stig from Top Gear on whether the BBC should cancel that show. And Jim Davidson speaks up for the first time on the Russell Brand allegations. He was, of course, falsely accused.
Oh, well, that, as always, is going to be absolutely fascinating stuff. It's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and it's going to be glorious in Somerset. And how are we doing at Taunton? That's what I want to know in the cricket.
Rained on.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkle and here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Some heavy rain across parts of the southeast clearing away overnight, but blustery showers in the northwest and some sunny skies on Thursday. Meanwhile, at the moment we are under the influence of low pressure just to the north of the UK, and we have a cold front lying across southeastern parts, and it's this front that is bringing some intense heavy downpours as we go through the rest of today, gradually clearing away towards the east overnight. Behind it, some clear skies developing though. Notice some showers towards western parts of Wales and England and some hefty rain across the far northwest of the UK. With the clear skies, temperatures are going to dip a little bit lower than some recent nights. Most towns and cities, though, holding up in double figures. Thursday is going to be a brighter, sunnier day than it has been recently, for most of us at least. Some showers already across western and perhaps far southern coastal areas of England and Wales. These becoming more widespread as we go through into the afternoon. Across Scotland and Northern Ireland, a bit more cloud here and some heavy showery rain feeding in, and this could turn thundery at times. Temperatures likely to be a touch down compared to today, but still getting to highs of around 19, possibly 20 Celsius. Through Friday then, it again is going to get off to a largely bright start, but we will see showers becoming widespread as we head into the afternoon. Some of them could still be heavy, perhaps even thundery, and notably still windy across the far northwest. But things are going to ease down as we go through later Friday, so Saturday should get off to a chilly start before the rain returns on Sunday.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute.
Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday.